What's up, everybody? This is the Mindbliss podcast, episode 3. I'm your host, Matthew Williams, with the most. And today, we're talking about a very serious topic in the world, actually, not just on our society, in our world. And I have a special guest that I actually know for a very long time, and this person has really revolutionized my thinking and kind of made me look at things a little bit different, from a different angle, from a different perspective. Without further ado, Samantha, welcome to the Mindbliss podcast.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Sorry for the delay, everybody. Well, we're here and we're live. So, first question is, I want to talk about your definition of mental health. What is your I know everybody has their own definition, but what was your definition of mental health?
So when I think about mental health, I think about just kind of like the mental well-being. So people's like emotions, their thoughts, their feelings, kind of like how they interact with the world, how they interact with society, just their day-to-day, living, how they problem solve, things of that sort. So there's a difference between, mental health and mental illness for sure.
Definitely. I think for me it's a tricky term. I think my definition of mental health would be the constant discernment of our thoughts. And the mind is a very complex mechanism. Constantly, we as human beings, we face constant thoughts. How am I supposed to sit? How is the mic supposed to be set? What kind of notes am I writing? Do I go on IG Live or do I go on? We're constantly making decisions in our mind. So I think we as human beings, we have to be able to discern what's good for us, what's pro-life, and what's anti-life. And we're habitual creatures, so it's very hard for us to catch ourselves in doing wrongdoing when you do it so many times.
Right.
You know what I mean? So that would be my definition, where discernment, where if I have a goal, is this pro-goal or anti-goal? If I want to become a lawyer, is this current step that I'm taking, is it pro-life or anti-life? I think that's the major concern when it comes to human beings and how to really make choices that are beneficial for us. And I think we have to be able to discern what's pro-life and what's anti-life. Another question that I have, which is a very interesting question, do you think our black people as a society, do you think that we downplay trauma?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think black people don't understand the concept of trauma. I don't think that they understand that they actually embody trauma and how it's manifested within their body. I think a lot of times when they interact with people or just their day-to-day living, they don't know that it can be through a traumatic lens, right? So for instance, just their senses, how they interact with people, just how they perceive the world can be from a traumatic lens. So I think when coming to trauma, it is something that is downplayed. I don't think many black people know that they are traumatized, or people in general, and I don't think they know the signs or the symptoms of trauma. So it's something where just how they perhaps maybe talk or just their emotions and their feelings can be from a traumatic lens without them being cognizant of that. So
Absolutely. I think that especially people in our community, or us black people, we substitute trauma with rage and anger and frustration and dismay. We can't fully grasp that we're depressed. We kind of have that tough persona about us, that hard armor. Like, I'm going through this, but I'm okay. I'm okay. And then we reach our breaking point, and then we just kind of go into this state where we just go crazy. And I think these topics are evident, they're prevalent in our society, and I think that we need to, this is a good conversation, because we open the awareness and we open the discussion, especially for black people. In my life, I've experienced racism. I think everybody in the room has, and prejudices, and instead of me becoming another statistic, what I decided to do when I was doing this Mindbliss platform is to study our people. Go back, study it from the root, study slavery. It's hard for us to understand the limitations and the problems that we face in the world, not just in America, not just in the world. It's hard for us to understand this without educating ourselves about slavery. So about 6 to 7 months ago, I started to really read, even before because I had this idea a long time ago. But even before this platform, I decided to re-educate myself and to read about slavery and where we're coming from. You know, why are gangs prevalent in our race? Why is there are reasons to this, and I think for me, it gives a sense of context to our problems in today's society. So I think, once again, this is a great opportunity for us to talk about it, because we experience racism in so many different ways, whether we're in the work field, whether friendships, whether, you know, relationships. You have Caucasian people who wouldn't want to talk to a black person, and vice versa. So just to kind of understand that.
So let's go back to trauma, right? Because that is a big piece, and that's something that's so pervasive in mental health and mental illness, because I think a lot of times within the black community, and even within other communities as well, right? They don't understand that their culture can be stemmed and created from trauma, right? So for instance, we know, our parents are from the Caribbean, we know how they raised us, and even their parents, right? They don't understand that there's something called intergenerational trauma, which is passed down from generation to generation, right? So a lot of the things that we see, which is, norms and values and just how they're socialized, usually can be created from trauma, right? So that's in a way where it can be downplayed, where different families from different Caribbean islands, the way that they raise their kids, or just how their household is kind of created, usually can be created from trauma.
Multi-generational wealth, that's a very key term, and I never really looked at it. You sent me a video, and I was really educated about the video that you sent me about multi-generational wealth. To trauma. Sorry, I'm thinking about money. Sorry. So moving on to the next question. I have a question here for you. Are you familiar with slavery? How has slavery really, from your intellectual opinion, how has slavery affected us black people as a whole?
That question is a mouthful.
You're gonna sum it up.
Yeah. So slavery, the way in which I see it, or the way in which I perceive it, is slavery has influenced our social norms, our values, our morals, the way that we are socialized, the way that we perceive the world, the way that we interact with people, the way that we kind of interact with other racial groups, for instance, white people, right? Even the way our communities are situated today can go back to trauma. The way that we kind of, the partners who we choose, the schools that we go to, all those things can lead back to trauma, right? So within slavery, we know that it's something that is still going on today. I mean, it's still prevalent, but the fact that we were robbed of something, our culture, just even the language, right? Half of us don't know our native tongue, right? So the influence of slavery on black people has hit us, especially mentally, emotionally. We have a hard time expressing how we feel. If we're angry, we usually internalize those things. If we're sad, at the same time, growing up, kids growing up in a Caribbean household, if they do express themselves, usually their parents would, shut them up, right? Why are you mad? Why are you sad? So expressing your feelings and your emotions, going back to, the slave owners, how black people weren't able to express themselves emotionally, or they had to downplay their feelings and their emotions so that their kids weren't taken from slave owners, right? So all that has actually influenced and impacted black people today, and that's why we struggle expressing how we feel, or just expressing our thoughts or our emotions, or just navigating through the world. So
it's interesting. The Abraham Lincoln, he's the one who freed all slaves, and they killed him. So obviously slavery is very profitable. Yeah. Profiteering is the idea. Profiteering, and to me, it's very interesting studying my culture. You know what I mean? I'm very intrigued on the hardships that we had to deal with, and we've made a lot of progress in based on what we had to work with. We've made a lot of progress. I mean, and we need to highlight those people. When we see people like Jay-Z, for example, a black African American who's a billionaire, who started from literally nothing, that's something that we as a race, we need to highlight that.
Right,
We need
right,
to
right.
make people understand that, hey, this person can do it. It doesn't. We don't have to be a billionaire, but we can free ourselves from this slavery mindset.
Right.
And slavery and that whole mindset, because it's a mindset really. That whole mindset is prevalent in the work society.
Of course.
90% of the workforce has a slavery mindset. You're told what to do, when to clock in, when to clock out, when this, when that, when this, when that. It limits your creativity thinking, your creative thinking. You're not able to, and most of these companies, they're run from a traditional background.
Right.
They don't allow any new ideas to come at the forefront of the company to maybe make the company more profitable.
Right.
But because they're so focused on this slavery and to the maintenance of ignorance. That's what it is. The maintenance of ignorance. We don't want you to know. It goes back to slavery where we weren't allowed to read. We weren't allowed to write. We weren't allowed to socialize. We weren't allowed to do any of those things. So the oppressor's objective is the maintenance of ignorance. And I think we as a nation we need to educate ourselves more. Not just about slavery, but about whatever we want to do in life. We have to educate ourselves. You know what I mean? So that's a good question. So my next question for you is, how much does culture play a role in mental health?
Culture. I think I kind of alluded to that prior, where I talked about the norms and the values and things of that sort. So with culture, like I said, and again, I have to talk about the black culture because we're black. So going back to certain households, the way that they communicated, or just the way that they communicate, the way that they interact with, children, parents, and things of that sort, or guardians, a lot of the times it's not healthy, right? So imagine being in a household where there's constant screaming, there's constant yelling. Someone, your parent is constantly verbally and, mentally abusing you. Imagine how that impacts a youth, right? So, my parents are from Grenada, so I know that just with their culture, their parents, the way that they interacted with them wasn't really the best, in the sense where there was, verbal abuse, kind of like, calling people stupid or dumb and things of that sort. So imagine an individual growing up, remembering the things that their parents said to them and how that affects them at work, or how that affects them with, interacting with people, right? So now you have an individual who heard things from their parents, which we all know that we really admire our parents highly, and then they grew up and then they remember those things in their mind. Now that plays a huge role on your subconscious mind, right? So the way that the body is, your body responds to inner thoughts. Now those inner thoughts end up manifesting within you, and now you actually, develop certain characteristics because of those thoughts that were from years ago. So that shows you how those words from your parents can actually leave an imprint on you, and then through that's when you actually can, navigate through life based off of thoughts from other people, right? So that's just the way that how it kind of affects your mental health.
The reason I want to reiterate about culture is the culture is, especially there's a serious problem in the music. The music has a profound impact on today's society and the way how we act. And I enjoy the music, but I can separate the music from the man.
Okay.
They can't influence me to do anything I don't want to do. But it's not the same with these, especially the younger generation. So the culture, and if you listen to the music, and I had to really look into myself and ask myself, what am I listening to? Like, what am I listening to? Like, I'm listening to the lyrics and I'm like, what am I allowing to take root into my mind subconsciously? And I might not even notice. I just enjoy the music, and I do still enjoy the music. But I think that our society has, especially the music, I think the music is very demonic. It's very inhumane in various, the cruelty, people celebrating killing, people celebrating taking somebody else's life.
Right.
People, they get excitement from that. They get pleasure from it. And we have to address the music industry as well. I think that the media plays it has a profound impact in especially the youth. And I think now it's become normalized because people don't really notice it. We just, okay, well, we're just gonna listen to this, and we may like the beat, and we may,
Right.
but it's normalized now. It's normalized to hear somebody saying, I want to shoot you, I want to kill you, I want to do this, I want to kill your family. It's normalized now to the point where it doesn't even bother us no more. And we have to be careful, especially with our race. We have to be careful when we listen to the nowadays music. Two people I want to recommend if you want to listen to hip hop music is Nipsey Hussle and Rick Ross, because those guys, they talk about wealth. There's a difference between rich and wealth. Two entirely different components.
Right.
So I think they're teaching us, they're giving us the game through their music, and I can appreciate that. So my next question for you is, what are the alternatives for people facing mental health? Where can we go? What kind of advice could you give people right now?
So people who are facing, mental health, I would say definitely there are different resources out there. I mean, throughout Toronto and things of that sort, and also in the States and wherever else. But I would say there are different, clinical techniques that they can actually utilize, different interventions. So for instance, mindfulness is a big one. So a lot of people use, yoga, things of that sort, anything to do with being in the present here and now. Because with mental health and with, trauma and things of that sort, usually it keeps you in the past, because you're always, going back to, things that happened to you back then. So you want to do different techniques that keep you in the here and now. So for instance, there's something called grounding techniques, which, kind of, works with your five senses, your thoughts, focusing on your body, focusing, on just your, the environment around you. There's also hypnotherapy. So some people do, hypnosis, which works because it works with the subconscious mind. People do art therapy. There are people who are, great with art, and they use that as a way to express themselves. There's music therapy as well, right? There's cognitive, behavioral therapy. There's some different, resources out there that they can use for, just their mental health. But I know people do meditate a lot, and that really helps them as well. So
that's a very common thing, that well-beingness, and finding that avenue for yourself. I think when it comes to mental health and the alternatives, I think the more that I get older, I see less resources. I don't really see a lot of resources in the communities, especially the communities that are really tough. You know what I mean? Right. I don't see as much as when I was in high school. When I was in high school, we had guidance counselors, and we had, pen pals, and people debase those services. But for you to sit down and write and send it to somebody, and somebody they may not know you, but they're able to give you advice and cheer you up. And a lot of times people, they can't go to their parents, or they have friends, but their friends are toxic. So there was more resources when I was growing up than now. Now I think, by my observation, the government has failed some of these areas, some of these really tough areas. Good people live in there. Good people come from the hood, but they need guidance, and the culture and the environment. That's what's so important, and we need to be more, I guess, social about these situations, because they're not talked about a lot, right? Good. My next question for you is, how does mental health differ among race?
So with mental health, I would say they're all the same, but the factors vary. So for instance, there's different factors that people might experience, but with mental health, I would say there's not really a difference. I just think there's different barriers. There's different factors that make it difficult for different racial groups to deal with their mental health. So things like race, things like income and income distribution, things like social safety net, things like disability. They're all factors, but again, amongst racial groups, they vary. I mean, we know that there is white privilege, so they might benefit more from these different resources and things of that sort, as opposed to Black people or people that are that are considered indigenous, right? So I would say mental health, again, it is something that is pervasive, but again, it's the factors that influence the mental health. So with mental health, there is a spectrum, because someone could be highly depressed, while someone else can be, lowly depressed as well. And again, signs and symptoms, they do vary as well. So.
Because you can be spiritually well and physically ill.
Right.
Or you can be physically well and spiritually ill.
Right.
So it's this goes back to the human mind and how it's so hard, right? It's a lot of pressure on us. I mean, this human mind, it's the greatest creation that God has created, but it's very hard to understand. It will have you. If you don't have it, it will have you.
Of course, definitely.
I think when it comes to the mental health among race, like I stated before, just trying to understand slavery. When you talk to a Jewish person, they make it evident that the Holocaust was an important, traumatic event in our culture. And if you want to offend a Jewish person, because you have people out there that say that the Holocaust never happened.
Right.
Just go up to a Jewish person and say the Holocaust didn't happen. It's like calling us, it's like a white person calling us the N-word. It's very, very offensive. But their community is so much better with understanding that trauma. With us, slavery, we have a hard time understanding how slavery works with Jewish people. And I have a lot of Jewish friends. They understand the Holocaust. They understand that there were babies that were put in microwaves, and they understand that their grandparents and great-grandparents fought in World War II. They understand it. They have context to it. And that's what this platform is about. It's about bringing context to mental health and also Black mental health. You know what I mean?
So going back to that, Matthew, because that's a very valid point that you talked about in regards to Jewish people. Now, with slavery, it's something that I mean, I can't wrap my head around it, why we don't really understand its impact, because it literally has impacted the Black community on a whole. And I think, again, going back to educating yourself, now when we bring up slavery, people say, oh, well, I mean, it happened so many years ago. Slavery is still occurring today.
100%.
We have systemic, slavery, right? Where, it's more covert in Canada, but in the States it's more, overt, where, I mean, they'll tell you straight up that, that they don't like you, right? But I think for here, because slaves were not able to express themselves on how they feel, on how, slavery actually impacted their mental health, that's why we struggle today. Where if you're actually hurting or if you're angry, it's hard to express how you feel, right? And there's a difference between, of course, feelings and emotions, but again, Black people have a hard time expressing. And again, if you're not aware of the signs and the symptoms, you won't know that you embody certain things. And that's why I'm saying it's really imperative that people educate themselves and understand themselves fully, because you can't tell me that you know who you are, but you don't know how your mind works, how your brain works, the different parts of your brain, right? People don't know, how the frontal lobe works. People don't know how, those things work, right? People don't know how the mind works, the various parts of the mind. People don't know, how they work, biologically speaking. So I think because, we lack that part, that's why it's hard to understand how slavery has impacted the Black community.
Definitely. Very good. Very nice. My next question is, doing what you do, how do you detox from all this trauma? Like, you're dealing with various people, different traumas from white people, Black people, Mexican. How do you detox from all of that trauma?
So self-care is big for me. Especially in this field, the burnout rate is really high. So self-care is big, whether it's listening to music, whether it's watching a movie, whether it's just chilling in my room by myself. Again, because I'm always hearing people's problems and things of that sort and just dealing with their mental health, I have to make sure my mental health is good. So I also have a therapist for myself who I talk to.
Nice.
It could be regarding just,
is
personal
it me?
things. No. Regarding personal things or just things with my job where I can kind of improve, that really helps me to stay sane, because again, if you aren't well mentally, everything else follows, right? Because however you think, that's how your behavior follows with that. So those are some things that I kind of work on.
The ship sinks if your mind is not is not there. How much of an increase has COVID-19 been when it comes to mental health?
So COVID-19 has proliferated mental health tremendously. There has been a huge increase in anxiety, depression, and suicide, which I kind of call like the big three.
Mm.
And again, it's
explain the big three to the viewers.
Okay, so I mean, there's various mental health disorders. There's some that's more common. So depression is more common. You know, bipolar, suicide, um, anxiety, things of that sort. So the main three that I have noticed because of COVID has been anxiety, depression, and suicide. So of course people have lost their jobs, right? They're not able to make ends meet. There are family members who were better off not seeing each other. So again, there's been a lot of dysfunction in families. So there are people who have lost their jobs. So imagine how that has impacted their mental health, where they weren't seeing their wife, they weren't seeing their partner. Now they're home in a lockdown for 3, 4, 5 months. Now because of that, they're feeling depressed because again, there's dysfunction in the home. There are youth who are working, and that's how they were able to make ends meet. Now they're not working, right? So of course that increases anxiety. We're told by the government that hey, you have to wash your hands, you have to do this, you have to do that. People now they have developed OCD, right, where they're constantly washing their hands. They're constantly not really interacting with people. So those are the ways in which mental health has been affected because of COVID. And with the suicide rate now, that has increased here, places like Vancouver and other places where people are actually committing suicide because COVID has affected and impacted them so much that they don't know what to do, right? They've lost all hope. And because there's nothing else for them to kind of live for, they have ended their lives. So we have definitely seen an increase in those 3 different mental illnesses.
I think it's important to try to understand the current time that we live in and gain prudence towards it, because this is the first time. Canada's always missed things. We don't have hurricanes, we don't have tsunamis, we don't have anything out of the ordinary happening in it. So this is the first time that we've really been attacked, and COVID besets on our security, whatever that means. So people are not as secure, and it's sad to see, especially young people who want to commit suicide. We're talking about young people that want to take their lives because they can't fathom this whole COVID-19 new world. And hopefully we're able to be a voice in their lives so we can try to help them and educate them about the current times and move on from there. COVID is not going anywhere. This is the new norm. Next question. This is good. Is this current generation, we're going to talk a little bit about generation. Is this current generation having a hard time attracting fulfillment?
So that could be answered in a twofold. In the sense where they are able to, because there are plenty of opportunities for them out there. They have social media platforms, there's jobs, things of that sort. There's more resources than ever. But at the same time, just the way things are, there's a lot of emptiness. There's a lot of emptiness because, again, with social media, people are able to express themselves through a screen, but face to face they have a hard time. Where they are feeling lonely, they are feeling depressed. They feel as if they're comparing themselves to other people. So there is a twofold in that way with fulfillment, where they do feel as if they're doing stuff, but at the same time they feel as if they're not really achieving certain goals and things like that in life.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough when you're young and you gotta figure out what you want to do for the next 40 years of your life. It's not smooth sailing. It comes with hardships. I want to ask you a couple of more questions before we go. So, what role does social media play in today's society when it comes to mental health?
So social media has been used as a great tool to bring about advocacy, recognition, being able to support people that struggle with that. And as well, it's been used as a great resource where people are able to find videos and quotes and other people's stories of how they've overcome mental health or mental illness or just trauma on a whole. But on the contrary, it has created I think confusion where people aren't too sure. Okay, well, this person has went through trauma for 2 years. I'm still experiencing it, and it's been 6 years. So what's going on with me? And that's where a lot of shame and guilt kind of steps in, where people don't understand. As well, people have used that platform to kind of express themselves with their mental health concerns, and that has brought about a lot of strife as well. So social media, has been used as a great tool. People are more aware of what trauma looks like, how it has impacted different culture groups, different ethnic groups as well. But at the same time, it's caused problems because it's showing videos of people killing people, right? Which is, again, that's traumatizing. There's really no filter to social media, and again, social media is not really aware of triggers and how that impacts people. So again, it is used as a great tool, but again, I think social media has just gone, off the wire, where people are just doing a whole bunch of nonsense now on social media. So.
I agree totally. I think that when it comes to social media, there's no proper way to regulate it, and a lot of people are hurting right now. Even on my platform, and I just started 2 months ago with this podcast. A lot of people reaching out to me. A lot of people going through a lot of trauma, a lot of hardships, and not even has nothing to even do with COVID. Sometimes it's just that inner that misperception of themselves, and they don't know how to fully express themselves, and we're able to, with the platform that we have, even though it's a small platform at this point in time, we're able to try to motivate people. Right, some of these topics may seem a little bit archaic, but at the end of the day, people are in need, and we're able to have this platform where we can educate people with your expertise, with your intellectual and your wisdom and my wisdom. We're able to. This whole thing started from a crisis, as you know, and as many people in this room know. If I never went through what I went through, we wouldn't be here.
Right.
So we have to, especially, better prepare the next generation that trauma isn't all bad. Life is suffering, and when crisis knocks on your door, it knocks on all of our doors, and we have to be able to embrace the challenge, and stop falling weak to the pressure. We have to take on whatever we're trying to take on full force, and especially us Black people who we don't fully comprehend trauma. And for us to we need to allow people to fall, and only when you fall is when you really truly find yourself and find your well-being. And this whole platform that we have started from a crisis, and I try to share my story with people and see if I can motivate them in any way, shape, or form, and let them know that don't worry about the trauma, don't worry about the crisis. Crisis happens to us all. The rich man and the poor man go through crisis. It's how we are able to find ourselves, right? Jim Rohn said it's not if you have $1 million, it's not the $1 million, it's the person that you have to become to obtain the million. That's the value. And whatever story that we have, that's why it's very important when Jay-Z talks. When Jay-Z talks, I listen. When Rick Ross talks, I listen. When these guys talk, I listen. These guys are preaching wealth, and it cuts different because they're our kind, and they know exactly the amount of hardship and trauma that we go through, and they're able to educate us through the music, and I think that's a great tool for our society. I'm gonna ask you maybe 1 or 2 more questions, and then we'll wrap it up. One of my next questions are: what are your thoughts with the current school system, and how much does it play a role into mental health?
Of the current school system. I do think the current school system is quite biased. With just the curriculum, with the courses that are chosen. Again, we know that the people that run the school system are predominantly white people. I'm not saying that they're not culturally competent, but I think that the way they were taught, I mean, there's a book that I read called The Miseducation of the Negro, which is a very, very good book, and how those classes have influenced youth to not, taking into account that Black people have done good things, or Asians have done good things, or Indians or Hispanics, just in the fact that the classes that are chosen, it more talks about white people, right? Just the things like, for instance, philosophy, right? With philosophy, it's more so white philosophers. With history class, I remember taking it years ago when I was in grade 10. Everyone who I read about in the books were white people, right? So I think with school and mental health, they've done more damage, but at the same time they're trying to take a more trauma informed approach in things. I think back in the day when we were in school, I'm not too sure if they really took into account our own mental health concerns. I think because there's more of an awareness now, yes, I do have my biases, but at the same time, I think they are trying their best where they do have like mental health days, right, in school. There's more social workers and psychotherapists that are, on the school premises to really help out youth. And I think that has helped because I think, again, with culture, there's always some change. I just see things as a fad or a trend where when they see how things are, they kind of move towards, that way. So I think with school, in regards to, mental health, they are trying their best to kind of, cater to children and youth. But at the same time, things can be re-traumatizing based off of how teachers talk. Are they trauma informed? Are they using words that can trigger different groups? For instance, are they using words that can trigger, someone who's Jewish, right? Are they using words that can trigger someone who's black, right? So at the same time, even though teachers and principals are trained, they're not, trained where, they're trained where trauma is concerned. They might know different sorts of mental illnesses, like anxiety, but can they really spot when a kid is anxious? Can they spot when a kid is depressed? When the kid is depressed, what do they do next? What are the next steps? Do they send to the office? Do they send them home? Is home even a safe place for that kid? So those are different factors that they have to consider, and that's why it's important that teachers do get trained in trauma, right? Aside from disability and things of that sort. So yeah, just some factors to keep in mind.
I've been bashing the school system for a long time, but the school system, it teaches you techniques. It teaches you 7 ways to get this, and say they don't study the mind, and not necessarily even the mind, more the subconscious mind, and how powerful that is. I think that we need a whole reform when it comes to the school curriculum, because we need to teach, especially black kids. We need to teach black kids about vision. We teach black kids about self-esteem, and not to hate each other, not to hate our race. We need to teach kids about courage. We need to help people find their own way in life, and give them the benefit. Let them think. Let them. Everybody has a right to think the way that they want to think, for whatever reasons. We all in this room have a belief system, and we think and we believe what we believe, and we have reason to that belief.
Right.
So it's not really what you know is what you know. Is it true? Those are two different questions, right? We spill a lot of our ignorance out into the world, and the school system, teachers are very impactful in kids' life. It takes one teacher to ignite the kid, and it just goes from there. And when these super successful people, they go back to when I was in the 6th grade and Mrs. or Mr. and they told me this, and I just caught on to it. And even though my household didn't believe in me, my teacher believed in me. So teachers, they're very, very, very significant in the community and in our kids' lives. Most of our kids' lives most of the day they're in school. And I think the school system also, and maybe we have to come back and talk about this, it teaches us to be employees. It kind of teaches us to be safe, right? That safeguard. Don't take risks. Don't go out there. Don't reach out for your potential. Don't step outside of your box. Status quo. Keep it safe. Shut up, do your work, right? hand in your assignment, and that's that, right? So it's impossible to measure how smart any kid is by an IQ test. Impossible.
Right.
Impossible. And that is what our kids have to face now. In this democratic society, they're going to face new problems.
Of course. We
have same-sex marriage. We have a lot of different things that are happening in the society now. Our society is open. So you may see an increase in trauma, especially in the youths in the next maybe 10 to 15 years, because the matters that our kids are going to deal with, we never had to deal with them. We never had to deal with certain things that are going on in society right now. So I think that's good. And I'm going to ask you one last question, because I want to get back to the multi-generational term. So my last question to you is, how can we prepare the next generation when it comes to trauma? How can we properly, because especially because I have a son, so I'm very, very, very like generational based. Like if I'm doing something, it has to reflect my son.
Right.
So how can we prepare the next generation when it comes to trauma?
The most important thing is education. Educate yourself. That is, I think that's very vital, because if you don't even understand the definition of trauma, then what are you doing? Right? You won't understand everything else. So I think definitely educate yourself. Understand what trauma is. Understand what trauma looks like. Understand the signs and the symptoms. Understand, how trauma is passed down, within people, with genes. Understand the biopsychosocial effects of trauma. And I think once people educate themselves, that's key, because once you know what trauma looks like, once you're able to kind of metacognate, where you think about your thinking, and where you're able to say, I'm feeling angry. Why am I feeling angry? What's going on in my environment? Who's around me? Where you're able to understand your triggers. Why is this thing triggering you, right? Where you're able to understand why you feel the way you feel. I think through that, when you're able to be more cognizant of things, then you're able to kind of navigate through life. But I think if you're not educated where trauma is concerned, then you'll go through life kind of not understanding your triggers, understanding your responses to things, understanding the biopsychosocial effect of trauma.
And that's a good point.
Right, understanding how intergenerational trauma has affected you. Even though it's your great grandmother, it still can be passed down. And of course, the general causes of trauma is the biological effect, environmental, and the cognitive effect, right? So keeping those three things into account, it doesn't matter if you were not in the event, even though you might have seen something on TV, it can still traumatize you.
100%.
Right? So people think, oh my God, I'm not in, the Middle East. You can still be traumatized here through your ancestors, right? So I think if you understand how you can actually embody trauma without knowing, and understand its effects, and understand what it looks like, then through that you're able to not only educate yourself, but also educate people as well. Because then people, they'll ask you questions, right? And then through that, that's where you have that ripple effect, right? So education is key. I think bringing about some sort of awareness. If you have information, share it. Why don't you keep things to yourself, right?
Definitely.
If you know more about trauma, share with other people who don't know about trauma. And I think through that, that's where there's going to be a huge impact and a huge change, especially in the Black community, when we begin to support people and also educate them as well.
And we're always in dismay, and that is why I alluded to vision and how important a vision is. I remember going to school, I went to college, and nobody ever mentioned that word to me. It was when I was an adult, I really figured out, okay, vision, okay, I can actually plan my life in this way and expect this outcome. I mean, even though I've passed the board, I can still go back to school.
Right.
Even though I haven't been able to do this, or let's say I can still go and get a trade if I want to, or anything like that. And that is about the education. And I think it was Socrates who said the unexamined life isn't worth living. And I think we have to educate the generation that's coming up. I have a son, so I have to educate. He doesn't watch cartoons. He watches about vision, about purpose, fulfillment, God. I'm trying to make him see a whole different side.
Right.
Your father, for whatever reason, weren't exposed to those. And people say, oh, well, he's just a year and a half. No, I'm working on that subconscious from now, because he's gonna deal with problems. He's gonna deal with trauma.
Right.
He's gonna have to overcome obstacles in life. And I don't want him to feel anxiety or anything like that. I want him to, and that is why I want to establish a firm relationship with him, that he can come to me for anything, for any type of advice, and I will try to guide him in whatever way I can. Right. So, because I'm really scared. Well, I'm not really scared of nothing, but I'm aware of. You said the awareness. When I watched the video with George Floyd, and I forgot to mention this. Like, how do we deal with trauma like that? Because here you have a video where a white man has his knee on a black man's neck. He's actually screaming for mommy. He has his knee on his neck for 8-9 minutes.
Right.
Right? And this is being videotaped. And he has his hand in his pocket. He's chilling.
Right.
So what kind of trauma is that gonna be? And they just did a settlement with the government and whatever. But what kind of trauma is that gonna be for the kids?
Right.
To see your father on video taking his last breath.
Right.
It's how do we? These are the questions that we're gonna have to link up again. But these are the questions that I continue, and I may not know the answers, but I want to create the awareness about it. How do we deal with this? Now it's different.
Right.
Now the awareness is way high now.
Right. Right.
Now we got white people looking at this and saying, "Hey, oh my goodness,
Right. Right.
this is what's going on." You see, they were kind of dubious about it beforehand, but now we got a video.
Right.
Right? Now we got a video, and I watched the video and I don't even know what to do. I'm picturing that was my son, and how, like, I would like to meet those kids and ask them like how do you feel? I just want to listen. I just want to shut up and listen. Like, how do you feel when you see your dad take his last breath? A white gentleman has his knee on his neck and he's looking in the camera and he has no sense of care. Right? And we all know the political side and the very the demonic side of police brutality, and we know that side, but this is on video, so this can be searched by one search button, you know what I mean? So how, like, and you've seen the riots, you've seen the riots, and the riots, I think it was Martin Luther King, the riot is the voice of the unheard, and we've seen, and I'm not an advocate of rioting, but I can understand it from that standpoint. So it was a good conversation. It was a good conversation. Thank you for having us on the podcast. I really, we need to do this again. Maybe in the next 3 months, and I'll be more prepared. I'll be more fast with it.
It's all good.
This is the Mindbliss podcast, and we're out.
Thank you so much.